Like, are we saying anything or just?
Yeah. Hold on. Noah, if you can please mute yourself. Amazing. All right. Good morning, good evening to all of our viewers from around the world, and welcome to Ask the Rabbi session of New Jews, New Jews channel. I'm Noah Razi, and I'm very, very excited to host this session. With me today are four incredible rabbis, Rabbi Reuven Tradburks, Rabbi Asher Meza, Rabbi David Siff, and Rabbi Noah Mazor. So thank you all for being here. It's really, truly an honor to have this conversation with you. Now, this session is not a debate, but a discussion and explanation of the different streams in Judaism, because for many converts, Jews, and people in general, the little differences between them are not so clear. So that's what we are here for. So you're more than welcome to drop your questions in the YouTube chat. And we, of course, will do our best to answer as many as we can. So I think that for the beginning, Rabbis, you will introduce yourself, and then we will dive into some of the great questions that we already received from the social media followers, and then we will take questions from the YouTube chat. So let's get started. Let's start with Rabbi Tradburks. We'd love to hear a bit about you.
Thank you. Reuven Tradburks. I live here in Jerusalem. I was a congregational rabbi in United States. The last position was in Toronto for 15 years. And when I was in Toronto, I was the director of the Bet Din for the entire Orthodox community in Toronto and did all of the intake and the management of conversions in Toronto over 10 years. Now I'm in Jerusalem, the representative of the Rabbinical Council of America, which is the umbrella organization of Orthodox rabbis in North America. And I run what's called an Ulpan L'Giur, which is a course preparing people for conversion through the Chief Rabbinate of Israel. And that takes place in English here in Jerusalem. Thanks.
Thank you, Rabbi Tradburks and Rabbi Asher Meza.
Hi. My name is Rabbi Asher Meza. I'm based out of Hollywood, Florida. I think out of the very impressive panel we have here, apart from the host, I'm also a convert. I converted to Judaism 25 years ago. And since then, I've been an outreach worker. After my conversion, I moved to Israel. I learned the Nesha Torah, I learned the Or Sameach, and I've been working for an outreach organization out of the old city called Ohel Avraham for Rabbi Jeff Seidel for the last 20 years. I worked in Hebrew University. I worked in Tel Aviv University as an outreach worker. And that's really where I think my specialty lies. I'm really invested in education and educating people with what they need to know to either properly return back to Judaism or to convert to Judaism. More from a halachic perspective, that's really what I focus on. And I was the assistant rabbi of Young Israel of Richmond for a few years. I had my own congregation in North Miami Beach, Florida for a few years. I've worked for many other outreach organizations like JAM out of LA, Migdal Or out of Israel, more from a technical perspective, like after I left Israel, like instead of hands-on. And I'm here to answer any question and try to contribute as much as I can to this fine panel we have today.
Thank you so much. Rabbi David Siff, your turn.
Yeah, so it's great to be here with you, Noah, and all of my rabbinic colleagues. It's great to be here with you guys. I graduated JTS. I'm a conservative rabbi. I served in pulpits for a bit, like Rabbi Tradburks. Right now, I'm in South Florida. I have I teach a lot of stuff, so I have an online program, and find their own path. I don't only work with conservative Jews and, really help people delve into Torah and find their own path.
Thank you so much. And Rabbanu Amazor.
Hi. I think Rabbi David Siff is still starting to talk. I'm Noah. I live in Haifa. I'm the rabbi of the Reform congregation in Nahariya. I'm an Israeli Reform rabbi, born and raised. Always lived here. What to do? I don't work specifically in conversion, but I work with conversion students. I taught a few students before. I'm teaching a few now. My father actually was the head of the Reform Beit Din in Israel for many, many years. So it's something that I definitely grew around with. And it's something that I'm very happy to do and to help with whatever I can do.
Thank you so much, everyone. So I think we will start with like the main question that I received, and it's why is there a division into different denomination in Judaism if there is only one Torah? If anyone will want to respond to that.
I'd be happy to throw out the first answer on that. So historically, people have been conflicted in their relationship with halakha. I mean, my perspective is it has to do with halakha. I'm totally open to other perspectives too. But in the 17th or 18th century in Germany, there were a lot of assimilated Jews who didn't want to do what they perceived as old world customs, keeping kosher, keeping Shabbat, and that was the formation of Reform Judaism. They started having sermons in German instead of in Hebrew, in Yiddish. They moved the bima to the middle of the sanctuary instead of having it at the front. I'm sorry, the front instead of the middle. And Orthodoxy formed historically as Orthodoxy as we know it. Calling itself Orthodoxy was a reaction to that and said, hey, no, like, we do want to observe keeping kosher and things. So in America, the American Reform movement, I apologize, I think actually I'm a minority here as being in America. In America, the Reform movement was formed mainly by these German immigrants. There was a famous banquet at HUC in 1918 where they served shrimp. So clearly at the time, intentionally rejecting what they saw as old world customs, although I'll be interested to hear from Rabbi Meza how the Reform movement has changed since then, because I think it's become more traditional. When I grew up Reform and no one wore a tallis. It was a different world. It's a different world now. And the conservative movement was something of a middle ground, which tried to maintain things like keeping kosher and keeping Shabbat, but finding halakhic ways to be more flexible than the rules that were adhered to by the Orthodox community. So for instance, the conservative movement came up with what we believed to be a justification for men and women sitting together in synagogue, while the Orthodox world, men and women don't sit together in synagogue.
Mm-hmm. If I could add to that, it was essentially the Reform movement that labeled anyone back then who was a fundamentalist, completely Torah observant, but from an oral and written perspective as Orthodox, to in some way lay the groundwork for their reform initially. This is why the Reform movement didn't really exist outside of Europe. It didn't exist for sure in the Sephardi world, because in the past there was just a Torah observant Jew, which from our perspective included the oral law, and those who felt a little more cosmopolitan, metropolitan, who in some way tried to progress Judaism. And mind you, the early Reform movement also had a mechitza. I mean, they had an Ezras Nashim. The men and women did separate. Like the rabbi correctly said, the major difference was that the drash was given in German instead of Yiddish. So, like he also correctly said, the major dividing line, I think, is halakha. And from our perspective, the fact that halakha doesn't change. The times may change, and we have very competent rabbis who help us navigate these times with this unchangeable law, but the halakha itself doesn't change, and as well, the Torah, the written law, also doesn't change. So I would say that's the major distinction.
So I want to take us all a little bit backwards and not just talk about the streams of Judaism today, but to say that, to remember that Judaism was never just one thing, or maybe it was for a very short time. But even if we go back about 2,000 years ago to the days of the Second Temple, we had different sects where we had and you'll help me with the English formal terms because I know them mostly in Hebrew, but we had the Isiim and Prushim and Tzdukim. We have different understandings of how to do Judaism. Of how to do Judaism. There are those who thought that the priests, the Kohanim, the priests in the temple were the most important, and there were people already then that thought that studying and rabbis that didn't really exist yet, but the scholars were more important. And there was those who went to the desert and tried to get away from everything and to create their own different world. So I think Judaism in general and in its culture and in its history, and that's like going very, very much long time ago, was already in different ideas and different ideology, and it always has been. And I think when we understand that after the Second Temple was destructed, Judaism tried to reinvent itself, and since then so many things have happened, and reality have changed, and the way we understand reality, and the way we understand halakha, and the way we understand what we need to do in our lives, and the way we are willing to accept the changes that are happening in the world, and the things that we are not willing to accept that are changing, or the way we react to the changes. That's why we have different streams in Judaism, because we have the Bible, we have one Torah, but we have plenty of rabbis. If you read the Mishnah or the Talmud, the books that came after, you'll see that different rabbis had very different opinions, and we don't have just one decision of how we should do things. There were a couple of very important people who wrote very important books, but every time there was another person who wrote another very important book, and it's not just one halakha, there's not one final decision, and there's always new ways to understand and to ask and to try to see what is going on. And that's why Reform Judaism today is still continuing on. And I would argue that Orthodox Judaism is also changing, although it will not admit most of the time that it's doing that. Yes, but that's how history and life and things happen to us, and therefore we have different views because we're different people.
Okay. First, I want to just mention, ironically, I think Noah is the only one who's grew up Reform and stayed Reform. David grew up Reform and got conservative ordination. I grew up Reform and became Orthodox, and Usher converted. And Noah did too. So that's just kind of ironic. Noah's the traditionalist in here. Anyway, so I agree with much of what everyone said. I think it's a certain degree that the differences in the different streams are that what people believe in. I think Orthodox believes the Torah should be kept the way it was interpreted in the Talmud, and through it's a bending of your will to live according to the rules that were given down through the ages. I think the Reform movement and conservative, to a large extent, felt, well, we don't actually believe that those things are binding anymore in the way that they were given at the time, and that through modernity, things the system has to be adjusted because of the changes in modernity. So I think in the practical sense, I think that's the differences, is that there's a sense that Jewish law, the way it was over the ages, is binding, and we have to bend our will towards it. And I think that's my take on the differences between them, though David seems to feel differently.
Yeah, I hear that a lot from Orthodox, and I always get very upset when people say that, because they completely misunderstand conservative Judaism, and I find it. I mean, I find it offensive personally. So I'm sorry. It's upsetting. We also I believe we bend our will to halakha. That's what halakha is. If you don't bend your will to it, then it's just idolatry of the self. So 100%. There's a teaching by Nachmanides on you shall be holy, right? So in Leviticus, you get all these laws, and all of a sudden the Torah says, by the way, be holy. So it's like, what in the world does that mean? You just gave me 613 details of being holy. Why do you need to add, by the way, by the way, follow all these laws that I just said? What does that mean? Detail how the laws should apply in every time, in every society. So the Torah gives you a picture of holiness in one particular time, one particular society, a gestalt, if you will. And we have to take that gestalt and apply it to our society. So, and this, by the way, is never used as justification in conservative responsa. Conservative responsa use the rules of halakha, but they're willing to find reasons to be more flexible than happens in Orthodoxy. We never go outside of halachic rulings. We never go outside of halachic reasoning. There are some shuvot that I think that have, and I personally don't ascribe to those, and a lot of in the movement don't. So it's not. It's not. So the halacha as a system of applying holiness in the world doesn't change. The world changes, and but the halachic reasoning, we use traditional halachic reasoning to get our answers, not trying to bend it to our will.
If I could respond before the rabbi is able to give his rebuttal. It's interesting that JTS was actually first considered somewhat of an Orthodox institution. The founders of the Young Israel movement were actually JTS grads. And it wasn't really to the mid-50s that there was a big fork in the road on whether you can drive to shul on Shabbos. And I think the initial ruling from the Rabbinical Assembly, I think it was still called that at that time, was that you could drive to your local closest synagogue and then back home. And then since then, they've in some way evolved that ruling. And Orthodoxy, by the way, has also evolved from that perspective. I think Rav David Cohen, famous posek, from New York, also said, to a certain extent, that someone could drive is better to break one Shabbos, right? I mean, so you could keep many Shabboses. We understand that. I think the major difference between the Rabbinical Assembly, which is, I think, the think tank, the halachic think tank of the conservative movement, and mainstream Orthodoxy, is that we don't derive halakha on what we necessarily think. We derive it from an unmovable source code that we consider Torah Sheba'al Peh, Divrei Sofrim, based on, if I could quote the Rambam, based on a Gadol Sheber Yerushalayim Chem Iker Torah Sheba'al Peh, that it's a Sanhedrin that sat in Jerusalem that is the source, the Iker of Torah Sheba'al Peh, of the oral law, and these laws are in some way set in stone unless we're able to, in the future, God willing, establish some other Sanhedrin that could anyway modify these laws, a Sanhedrin of greater wisdom and greater number. So that's the major difference, I think, today between Orthodoxy, mainstream Orthodoxy, and the conservative movement. That I think the conservative movement views it more almost like a svara. Like they keep on adding, but more like from a hashkafic perspective, while Orthodoxy is stuck with issues like agunot, like a 2-day yontiv. Why? Because we feel these rulings are set in stone. Based on this authority that we believe appears in Parshat Shoftim, the mitzvah we have of lo sasor, of not in any way straying from the actual court, the authority that this court had that had smicha to establish unchangeable law, basically laws that only they can change. But I think that's the major difference. I don't know if Rabbi Reuven wants to add anything to this.
No, I think I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
And I mean, I would say we see the process as unchangeable. I think that's what we'd say. I don't know of any time when we've gone against any ruling of the Sanhedrin at all. But so for instance, on electronics, they came up with a very detailed discussion of basically saying that lights are not a Torah fire by the definition of Torah. They're maybe fire by the definition of the rabbis, but depending how you use it, if it's used like fire, if it's not used like fire, so they'll go into intricate reasoning in ways that go against Orthodox practice. But I don't think we need to go into, I think we're kind of devolving into debate rather than just exploration. So I would just say, but I would say, like, we see the process as unchanging. We try to we do follow the rules of the process. There are shuvot that I don't buy because I think they went too far. But I also think Orthodoxy goes too far in defending the status quo and not making use of possibilities for adaptation, which are actually there in the tradition already.
Okay, so I think we will continue to our next question, which is how does Orthodoxy address modern Jewish law questions if it follows tradition?
Yeah, so I'm not sure which ones you're referring to, but I think what,
For example, AI, technology, things like that.
yeah. So within the Orthodox world, there are great authorities who work on these issues all the time, and there's a corpus of law. Many things, this is difficult to explain in a theoretical way to people who are in the process of conversion because they don't have experience necessarily with Talmud and Jewish law and the Code of Jewish law. But there's many things that are discussed in the Talmud that are highly theoretical, in which you study them and you say, really, why are you bringing up something that really would never happen? And the Talmud is trying to establish rules, principles, theoretical rules. And as history unfolds and new things come up, those examples become the source on which to draw on. So issues that are being discussed today are the ethics in AI, and it is being discussed trying to use all the principles. For example, one of the issues that comes up today is organ transplants. Can you take the heart or lungs from a person who is brain dead and transplant those, or is that considered murder if the person is being kept alive on a life support system? So what Orthodox authorities use are the examples that the Talmud has. If a person is buried under a pile of rocks and you can't detect any respiration, is that person considered to be dead or alive? So there's theoretical things that are mentioned in the Talmud and Jewish law over the years that are used as the sources for trying to address the issues in modernity. But it is, as Usher mentioned before, the principles are there, the applications. It's then we then try and apply the principles to issues in modernity.
Thank you so much. Noah, this question is for you. What's the difference between a reformed person to a secular person?
It really depends on the person, actually. And I think it's true for everyone, but I'll answer a question. I grew up Reform, as I said, so I am a praying person. I actually, some people might think of me as someone who's more, I don't know, conservative or even closer to Orthodox in some ways. Because I think that when you think of someone who's secular is someone who's not doing any praxis, and I'm guessing the question assumes that it's also true for Reform people. But at the end of the day, I think the most important thing about Reform Judaism and about being a Reform Jew is the ability to make a decision and to choose and to understand and to make your own learning and understanding and finding your way in life. So you can be a Reform person who chooses not to drive on Shabbat and not to eat in not kosher places and to pray every day or to pray once a week or to pray every certain amount of time. And you can choose to be a Reform person who does go to different places, like to go to non-kosher restaurant or to not to daven ever, and still think of yourself as a Reform because you think of Judaism as something that is relevant and important. If you need to, and when you get to a point in life when you want a Jewish perspective on it, if you want to celebrate something, if you want to do something with that, you want to do it, you prefer to do it with a Jewish stream because of the way it looks on life. I'll add to that one more important thing, that I went very easily. I fell on my own example. I went very easily to the questions of Shabbat and kashrut and things like that. But you can also talk about the question of Rabbi Reuven just mentioned organ donors. And you can talk about taking care of one another and making sure that we take care of people who are for foreign workers, and how did the government react to them? What does the government say that is the Jewish thing to do? We say that taking care of them is part of our Jewish life, and making sure that we don't send them away to where they might be in a much worse situation is part of our Jewish understanding. And I'm not even to talk about the hostages today and the war and questions like that. So the question of what does it mean to be a Reformed Jew can be part of what we understand about our Jewish life and our Jewish tradition, and not just the practices that we do or not do that we know from all kinds of other places in our daily life. I hope
So
I made sense.
I see that we have a following question in the chat. Yes, David.
Before that, can I
Rabbi
just
David.
emphasize one thing? No, I just,
Sure.
and I think for all of us here, I'm guessing, when we say halakha, we mean exactly what you just said, Rabbi Noah. We don't just mean the ritual things, keeping kosher, keeping Shabbat. Yes, it means, where do we stand on immigrants? It means, who do we take care of in our society? It means, how do I speak to my neighbor? It means all of those things. So when we as rabbis at least say halakha, we're talking expansively as just, how do I live my life? Halakha means the walking, the way we walk. There's a TV show, The Mandalorian, where they said, this is the way. So that's what we're talking about. Like, what is the way?
Yeah, so I would
And now
have to
you have the
disagree.
top-
I'm sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. I like that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you were done. From an Orthodox perspective, perhaps I could agree with you on the micro. However, on the macro, when we say halacha, that we mean something sourced out and that essentially can't change. We can view it a little differently, but it doesn't change, and it's not really defined as social action or perhaps on any other topic that halacha doesn't cover. That could be what's called midat hasidut. I mean, it could be a nice thing that we do, but we try not to compromise the term halacha by just equating it to just mere ethics.
So, okay. So I want to pull this apart a little bit, because I've had this disagreement with I've seen other. So when I say it, what I mean is, halacha has always been, what does Torah teach me to do in this situation? And there are new situations that come about in life, because clearly you're not going to say, oh, halacha has nothing to say about electricity on Shabbos, right? You're not going to say that. So there's always new situations in life, and Torah tells me how to act in those situations. I have to think, I have to use my brain, I have to say, okay, the Talmud doesn't mention electricity. So what, as Rabbi Reuven said, what source in the Talmud is relevant to the question of using electricity on Shabbos? The Torah doesn't talk about, well, it actually does talk about immigrants, but when there are contemporary situations, ethical, ritual, whatever, I have to apply Torah wisdom to that situation. Now, you're right. If there's no Torah value that applies, sure. But at least from my perspective, Torah has something to say about every aspect of my life.
So I would slightly disagree. It seems that the Torah itself never endorsed independent study on any specific issue. It established a court for us, known as the Beit Din HaGadol. It had many different names, the Anshe Knesset HaGadolah, eventually the Sanhedrin, and it said, do not stray from the right or to the left of what this court establishes for you. They will give you the Torah. Now, again, from a macro perspective, we don't need this court to encompass everything. Like in terms of electricity and Shabbos, there's even much nuance in Orthodoxy within that. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach wrote Minchat Shlomo. The rabbi who had the largest funeral in Israeli history actually believed that you weren't in any way violating a malacha by using electricity on Shabbos, although he himself didn't use it. He said essentially it was his middle not to use it. I mean, showing that in some cases there's even more nuance within Orthodoxy. Essentially nuance not departing from the actual source text, instead of just nuance for nuance sake. And I think that's the way Orthodoxy views other streams of Orthodoxy.
And for the following question in the chat, so Reform has permission to do whatever they want and never say that they failed to meet the standards?
Yes. We don't talk about standard. we talk about working on ourselves and learning and making our own decisions and understanding why. I'm not saying just, oh, well, let's make our own decision, but based it on learning and understanding and asking questions and trying to understand what the halacha and the Torah and all the things that we had from the past have taught us. And also, what is the situation and what is the question that is up to today? We don't talk about standard. There's no meeting a standard in order for us to be Jews. Well, except the only one that I always give the example of is you can't believe in another God and say that you're Jewish. That doesn't work. But apart from that, just like any other person who is born Jewish and always will be Jewish, it's also true for anyone else. There's no standard that you need to meet in order to be Jewish. That's who you are. Now, what you do with it, that's your responsibility.
Interesting. Thank you, Noah. So let's connect it a little bit to the conversion process in Judaism. And Rabbi Tradburks, this is for you. Why is the Orthodox conversion process is so difficult and demanding?
Thanks. Well, it is. It actually is. The principle that we function under for Orthodox conversion is that a person needs to accept the mitzvot and accept that they will live according to the mitzvot. There are some Orthodox rabbis that don't necessarily demand that the person be fully observant, but the vast majority of Orthodox conversions in the world today require one to be, by the time you get to the conversion, to be keeping Shabbat in a strictly Orthodox manner, meaning you don't travel on Shabbat, you don't use electricity, you attend synagogue, to keep the holidays, to keep kosher, to have daily prayer, to make blessings over food. And that's expected of the person by the Bet Din when they come for their final meeting. And that's based on the principle that we believe that conversion is an acceptance of the Torah in its entirety. And the acceptance of the Torah means that we feel, as I said before, we bend our will and observe everything that the Torah said. So what that means is that you have to study to know what to do. You have to study the laws of Shabbat. You have to study the laws of prayer. You have to start to do it, and you have to observe Shabbat over a period of time so that you know what you're doing. So that's the process. At one level, it's very demanding. At another level, it's certainly doable. People can do it. There's an assertion of will. So that's the problem. That's the process that is demanded in Orthodox conversion.
So why can't I just take upon myself all the mitzvot? Okay, I will study like for 2-3 months. I'll take upon myself the mitzvot and then to convert. Why it had to take like more over a year?
So there is no set amount of time that it takes, especially here in Israel. When people come to me for the first call, sometimes the people are not aware of observance at all, and sometimes people have been observing mitzvot for 20 years, and yet we're nervous about making that last step. In which case, when they go to the Bet Din, they accept them at their first meeting. It doesn't take any time at all. So it's all a function of, there's a lot to learn. The daily prayers, you have to know what to say and what they mean, and you have to know the blessings on the food, and you have to know that process of getting ready for Passover and getting the matzah and all the mitzvot. There's a lot to learn. The rabbinate here in Israel requires a course of 400 hours. That's a lot. So our course is 6 hours a week over a year. So it's a lot of hours of study and commitment. So in theory, a person can come and convert in 2 months if they commit themselves to mitzvot. But in reality, there's a lot to learn, and so it takes more time.
Thank
Can I
you.
jump in, Noah?
Sure.
Rabbi Tradburks, that's wonderful. I'm amazed that you have people with that level of commitment. That's great. I think that's wonderful. So to go back to what I said earlier about how there are sources within the Talmud for more flexibility, right? There's when you look at the Talmud about what conversion is, they don't know what Jewish life is, right? Hillel converts somebody who wants to become the high priest. He says, sure, he converts him. And then he studies and the guy realizes, oh, I won't get to be the high priest. So the guy clearly doesn't know the first thing about it. And apparently, I got this from a student of Reb Moshe Feinstein. I haven't read it in his tshuva, but I got this from his student. Reb Moshe Feinstein held that you have to know some amount, right? You have to know some mitzvot. You're not expected to know every detail yet. You're not expected to necessarily follow every detail yet. You're just required to know a little bit and accept in principle that I'm following Torah as interpreted by the rabbis. So that's the standard I use. I'm guessing, Rabbi Tradburks, when you referred to those other rabbis, I'm guessing that's the kind of standard they used. So, to me, that's the standard I hold by. Although I admire you and your students, I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I think to go back to the Talmud and to see what was in the Talmud is interesting in the discussion about conversion. We rely on modern authorities, and the modern authorities, advocate that a person has to keep all of the mitzvot. And if one of the issues I was just going to mention is that there is a view that if a person is converted to Judaism and then does not keep the mitzvot, that the Bet Din violates what's called lifnei iver lo titen mishal, that you've put a stumbling block in front of the blind. In other words, you've brought a person to Judaism, but then you've really been unfair to them because you didn't teach them all of the mitzvot, and now they stumble, and you've caused that. So there is a sense of responsibility to the Bet Din to kind of ensure that the person is going to be loyal to the mitzvot and keep the mitzvot. Otherwise, they feel personally responsible for something which is to their detriment.
So if I could add to this, see, are we done, Rabbi? I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. Okay, great. I'm going to have to side with Rabbi Siff on this one, and I think this is another example of nuance within Orthodoxy. The conversion process as it's done today is so detached from the Talmudic ideal, from the Mishnaic ideal, even from the ideal laid down by the Rishonim. I don't think anyone who could pick up Yoreh De'ah and Shulchan Aruch or like a Sirabi and the Rambam and read it halacha by halacha or siman by siman could ever conclude that what's done now in the Orthodox world is actually what our sages thought the halachic process of conversion should look like. And I know that it's a hard task the Rabbanut has, as well as the RCA, preparing candidates for conversion, to in some way marry two ideas, the halachic ideal with the modern state of Israel. It's definitely a hard task. Like, I don't really accept the notion that we in some way fold to modernity, that modern rabbis have a say, or then why are we any different than Reform? Why are we any different from conservative? The Orthodox standard is that the halacha doesn't change. The halacha never changes. So it's essentially true. In Masechet Shabbat, it says that Hillel converted someone in one day. The halacha is pretty clear cut. From Masechet Yevamot, Hilchot Sirabia, Yoreh De'ah, they all quote each other, and it's essentially the same procedure. Somebody comes to convert, it never literally says they have to be completely makabel. That means they have to necessarily accept the commands. Why? Because there's a principle laid down in Jewish law of goyos b'torah chag misa that you're not supposed to teach someone who's not already Jewish all our Torah laws, right? I mean, the Rambam, I think, lays this down more because they might be able to use it against you. So if they learn anything, they learn it with us, and we only have a real obligation to teach them anything once they actually enter the Jewish community. So it seems that the practice was to convert them somewhat immediately. I mean, the Rambam lays down some principles, the basics of avodah zarah, like the gleanings of the field. And if they accept it, he says that you accept them, miyad. And then it says that you teach him all this again when he's already in the water. So for sure, there's a huge disconnect between what appears in the Talmud, what appears in Halacha by Rishonim, and what's actually done today. Not that I don't think anyone today is in any way excluding any of these parameters, but it seems that in this area, they've focused on being or doing things l'chumra, like on a from a stringent perspective. What makes it a slippery slope is that we have a mitzvah, v'aftem et a ger lo tone, of not mistreating the convert to the point that what we shouldn't do is make it so difficult that people would not want to convert. According to Rav Sadagon, and this also applies, like not mistreating converts also applies to people who are in the process or who are interested in converting. And I think for sure, it's a difficult balance, but the Rabbanut, in some way being married to the Medina, made it a more difficult process, to the point that I would say that more people make aliyah, like via the Sochnut, like not the Rabbanut, by converting Reform and Conservative, than converting Orthodox, because the Rabbanut has made it so difficult. And I think it was Rabbi Shlomo Goren who started the practice of nullifying conversions. I don't even know if Reform and Conservative does that. But could there have been a bigger step to make us look, one, primitive, and two, less halachic than that? I think it was Rabbi Chaim Dreskel. I remember that when I was living in Eretz Yisrael, there was this member of the Rabbanut that they invalidated, I think, 5,000 conversions in one day. Completely absurd, only making us look worse. So I think that the closer we get to the actual source text, the more lenient the process actually becomes, not the more stringent. So it seems like nowadays we've become overly stringent, while other streams of Judaism have become overly lenient. And I think the goal is to remain within the halachic framework, which is essentially what appears in Shulchan Aruch. I don't know, like, if you want to respond to that.
No, do you want me to respond, or you want to go on to the other questions?
I think we will go on because we don't have much time. So in the chat, how does conversion work if you are in a relationship with someone who wants to convert with you, asking Orthodox rabbis? So Asher and Reuven.
I go first?
Right.
So I think it was Rabbi Unterman as well as Rabbi Uziel. I may get them confused. Like in Eretz Yisrael, who basically said it wasn't an issue, right? For sure, it's not a halachic issue. It's somewhat of a practical issue, which is why people don't convert individuals who are married, who have spouses who choose not to convert as well, because it's a halachic problem for someone to cohabit a space to live with a woman who's not his wife after you convert. It's obvious you have to remarry this person, but the person is not Jewish. You can't, perform kiddushin with the non-Jew and a Jewish person. So it's a practical problem. It's not necessarily a halachic one, because halakha never said you couldn't do it. I mean, the idea of people converting for marriage was always a thing. I think there's an example. I think it's brought down by the Rambam, that they asked him, like, what do you do with someone in the shul who's having an affair with his maid? I think the Rambam responds, well, that they should convert her and they should live in peace. Meaning it's a halachic process. However, it does become a form of lifneiver, like the rabbi says. If you just convert anyone, I mean, who's going to pay the price for, I don't know, with the way this individual may make Judaism look, our kids are going to pay the price. So for sure, we should be responsible to show them that that's not the ideal. However, I would say that people who convert for marriage make up a big chunk, and I'm pretty sure the rabbi knows because he's like a member of the RCA, of those who convert in the United States. So halachically, is it allowed? I would say yes. Is it practical to convert such a person? I would say no. But even there was this organization called the Eternal Jewish Family. It had a haskama from Rabbi Yosef and everything, that they actually taught that it was okay to proselytize the spouse of people who were Jewish for the sake of the kids and encouraging, more healthy Jewish families across the world, than to just in any way say, no, we won't convert this person, and these people just continue getting married and essentially have non-Jewish children. So it's absolutely a dilemma.
Rabbi Asher, they're not married.
No, right. No. So even from that perspective, I quoted the two chief rabbis of Israel that halakhically it's not an issue, but halakha for us means what literally appears in source material. Practically, what should you do? There's no obligation for you to convert anybody.
The question is there an issue with them converting, given that once they convert, they will be two Jews living together who are not married?
Yeah, so let me comment on that. We have many people, both when I was involved in Toronto and the RCA, and here, who are in relationships, either a Jew and a non-Jew, and they want to get married afterwards, or two non-Jews who want to convert at the same time and marry afterwards. So that's we do that all the time, and often what happens is that we actually do a marriage for them if they are living together, right at the mikveh. In other words, they go to the mikveh, they both convert, and then you can, here in Israel, we could have 5 or 6 weddings right at the mikveh, right, with couples that are getting married right afterwards. So that's something which happens all the time. The challenge for a couple is that they're going to be on the same wavelength in terms of acceptance of mitzvot as they go, but that happens all the time.
Thank you. Rabbi Reuven and Rabbi Asher, can you please explain the differences between the not recognized conversion, even though it's Orthodox, and the recognized one?
Yeah, so let me comment on that. So when I was a rabbi in Toronto, the Rabbinical Council of America, the RCA, I was in charge of this project, undertook a survey of converts who have gone through the RCA, about 900 converts, and asked them various questions about the process, what worked, what didn't work. And one of the things, 95%, said that the reason why they came to the RCA Bet-Din was because they wanted to be accepted by everyone. So as you could hear, even in this discussion between Rav Asher and myself, there are Orthodox rabbis that don't do the standard which I said before, which is that the conversion candidate should accept all of the mitzvot and be observing all the mitzvot when they convert. So even though I say this with due respect, when you have theoretical discussions about what the Talmud says about conversion, that's theoretic. But the reality is that you have rabbis today and you have great authorities today which set the standards of what conversion is. And if people do conversions at a different standard, then you're going to have the situation where you'll come into my synagogue and I'll say, I don't think that conversion met the halachic standard. And then the person will say to me in tears, so what does that mean? You mean you think I'm not Jewish? And that's a difficult discussion, but that is then the case. So as a part of the challenge of what the Rabbanut does here, what the RC does in America, is try to do conversions at a standard that is the norm of the halachic authorities, recognizing that there may be people who do more leniently. So today, the norm is to accept all the mitzvot, and if a person does a conversion, either reform or conservative, or even with Orthodox rabbis, that doesn't meet the standards, the unfortunate thing is that the many Orthodox rabbis will not accept that. So we felt when we were establishing the courts for conversion in the RC in the States, that the best thing that we could do, based on what the people themselves said, was to establish a standard where the people who would convert through those courts would never be subject to that pain. When I was in Toronto, I had to deal with a number of different synagogues and whatever, that they said to me, people come in tears that their conversions are not accepted. Can we just tell them to call you and you'll be the bad guy, and tell them? In other words, it was very painful. It's very painful for people to not be accepted, even though they had gone through what they thought was a halachic conversion.
I
Can I
could respond to
just
that. Hold on, send me. Just before we lose this, with this momentum here, it's kind of interesting to feel bad, like for a standard that you endorse, right? I think that's really what makes Orthodoxy different from Reform and Conservative. That we don't make things extra difficult. We don't make it too lenient. We try to stick on the authority laid down by the rabbis in the Sanhedrin. As a matter of fact, with this story, a similar story that is mentioned in the Rambam in Serbi in the 13th chapter, on how in the times of the Beis Din Gadol in the time of Shlomo Melech and David Melech chose not to accept converts, just because people were converting for financial reasons. Israel was doing fine. Of course, people wanted to join them. However, when Hedyotot, laymen, kosher Jews in the street, decided to convert people, the Sanhedrin eventually accepted it, with this idea that once something is done via the halachic process, that another Orthodox, Torah-keeping individual is going to then say, I'm not going to accept something done by the halachic process is the breakdown of Orthodoxy. It may not be ideal, given to Israel's current day situation, to allow people, let's say in South America. I work with a lot of people in South America they've had to import rabbis from Israel to convert them because the Rabbanut doesn't want to accept typically converts from, let's say, Colombia. And these individuals live very kosher lifestyles. They've built mikvahs, they have schools, but they can't go into your standard Orthodox synagogue because the rabbi who converted them is not on the itim list. They're not endorsed by the Rabbanut, but it was done according to halakha. So what is Judaism, or what is Orthodox Judaism from that perspective, if not halakha, unchangeable halakha? If we really believe that Torah Sheba'al Peh doesn't change, how could any Orthodox person, and I would say the vast majority of conversions done in the Orthodox world are not done through conversions recognized by the Rabbanut. And this is mainly in places like India, in South America, right? In many places in Eastern Europe, people decided to start their own communities. And it's a little problematic. I think it's the breakdown of Orthodoxy, that one group tries to stick to the actual halachic framework as it appears in Shulchan Aruch, as it appears in Mishnah Torah, right? And then another one, because of the realities of a secular state called Israel, they're in some way going to modify the standard, especially when we have commandments that tell us not to mistreat converts. When God himself says that he's going to destroy the Jewish people if you mistreat the almana, the yatim, the ger, right? Specifically, these three cardinal sins, if one could say, right, could cost all our existence. I think from this perspective, I think that we should strive to not place any form of barrier. Of course, vet people. It doesn't have to take a week. It could take a year. But I've known people in a conversion process that's taken them 10 years. And some people, some individuals are forced to live like Noahides when they truly, truly want to be part of the people of Israel. And I think it's a bit absurd.
So I just want to make a distinction, though, because when people talk about being accepted, there's a difference, I think, people don't always get between the Rabbanut and the state of Israel. So it's really important distinction, right? The Rabbanut means the Orthodox rabbinate in Israel. So if you convert in a Reform or Conservative synagogue in America, or if you are a member of a Reform synagogue or Conservative synagogue and take your classes on an online platform, there's other ways to do it. But if you're converting through Reform and Conservative, then you can make Aliyah, you can go to Israel as a Jew. You won't be accepted by the Orthodox Rabbanut there. You will be accepted by Rabbi Meza. You will be accepted by a Conservative synagogue there. You won't be able to get an Orthodox marriage or funeral there, which is why a lot of Israelis go to Cyprus to get their weddings, because they don't want to do it within the Orthodox Rabbanut. So when we say accepted, there's two very different things going on there. If you want to get accepted by every Orthodox synagogue in Israel, then you'd better go to one of those RCA Beit Dins. If you want to be able to function as a Jew in the circles you want to function in, and also, by the way, right, you shouldn't convert in a stream just to be accepted by certain people. You shouldn't say, oh, that's the Lamborghini of conversion, so I'm going to convert that way. You should pick a conversion process that's authentic to you. Because if you go to an Orthodox Beit Din and say, I want to convert so I'll be accepted, they'll say, forget it, and rightly so, right? You should convert Orthodox because you want to live life as an Orthodox Jew. You should convert. If you want to live life as a Reform Jew, you should convert Reform. You should not convert to be accepted by certain people.
I couldn't agree more, and I just want to emphasize what you said. You started from the difference between the Rabbanut and the State of Israel, and just to remind us all, or to tell us all, I don't know if you know, that the Rabbanut was created by the Ottoman Empire. It's not a Jewish thing. It's a structure that was composed by the Ottoman Empire in order to take care of the Jewish people and their religious things. And we inherited it up from the Ottoman Empire to the British mandate to Israel. It doesn't mean that that's the only Jewish way there is. That's the way the things are combined or intertwined together, but it's not the same thing. And as Rabbi Siff just said, if you believe in the Reform way, we will accept you. And you can do it also, and if you leave, there's certain criteria, but you can do it also in Israel. You don't have to do it far away. And if you do it far away, you will definitely be accepted here, definitely by us, and by Israel, by the state. And there's two different things, and it's very important to remember this difference.
Thank you so much. Anyone wants to conclude to say anything else?
Yeah, I just want to make one comment about that. There's a lot to talk about, and I think that the internal debate that was going on amongst the rabbis may have left some people in the dust. But I will make one comment. It's very interesting that we're talking about conversion at various different standards when pretty much all of us, except Noah, made changes in our lives in the commitments that we made. Half of the students in our Opan Ligior, in the conversion course in the Rabbanut, are people who have made Aliyah based on Reform and conservative conversions. And when they come to the land of Israel, state of Israel, they feel there's so much religious community that I want to be a part of that's Orthodox. They decide that they want to do an Orthodox things. So people change. And the decision, especially in conversion, like your life changes over a long period of time. And so it could very well be that life will change after the conversion as well. And you'll have other things that will be of interest to you later on in life that will take you in a different direction. There's lots to talk about in conversion. And let me just make one comment that I think it's always important to acknowledge that people who are doing conversion are making commitments that. I'll just tell you a story. We were talking about a talis, about wearing a talit with the fringes on the corner. So one of the students asked our teacher, Rabbi Goldscheider, "Do you put the blue string on the corner? Like I see a lot of people with the blue string." He said, "No, I don't do it because I didn't grow up that way." And he said to me, "Do you do it?" I said, "Well, I've won like that." He said, "You think you should?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "What an irony. You and I are not willing to make a little change to add the blue string. And these people that we're teaching are like making the biggest changes in their lives." I have enormous respect for anyone who has a passion for Judaism, wants to become Jewish, makes all the efforts to study and to make the commitments and to become a part of our people. Our people are enriched by converts. Thank you, Noah, for all you do as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we have to conclude. So if the rabbis agree, I will put their details below in the caption. And thank you all for their really respectful and engaging conversation. And really thanks especially to everyone who participated. And may our unity as the Jewish nation will help to bring redemption to the world. So thank you so much
Amen.
for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye.
I'm sorry I have to run. I'd love to chat, but I really have to run right now. Thanks,
Yeah,
Noah.
sure. Goodbye.
Bye, Noah.
Bye-bye.